Proportional Response. Book 1, Chapter 23, Part 6. Bracing for the Wild Card. Hannibal stood in his booth at the top of the council chamber and meticulously kept all emotion off of his face. I woke up this morning expecting for us to force the vote of no confidence on Killentar today. Now all I can do is worry about what sort of wild card the Penigra are holding. Henry started on the litany required to call a session to order, not skimping on so much as a single syllable. The somewhat jovial mood of the chamber began to shift by inches as the man continued to speak. He isn't just reciting the calls to order, he is delivering them, using them for their intended purpose, to focus everyone on the task at hand and drive home the import of what we do here. I have never heard the litany spoken with such force and conviction. No, wait, that is not true. Kaz has managed this much and more a few times when he felt the matter called for it. Hannibal felt his eyes narrow slightly, and he studied his brother. Henry knows it too. He could do more, could rival and maybe even surpass what Kaz has done in the past, but he doesn't, always with an eye on the plan. At last, the call ended, and Henry began his own speech. I thank you all for coming today, for choosing to play a part in changing the nature and direction of this council and the entire league. It took a lot of votes to issue a required call to quorum, and this could have been a long, drawn-out process if too many of you had gotten together to fight it. You know why we are here. The articles of the league state that a vote of no confidence can be called against any prime minister who has failed to faithfully execute the duties of the office and/or failed to put the needs of the league above all else. There are many who have expressed publicly that they consider this vote as a conviction against the Exaltan Republic as a whole, or against the Republic's voters. I urge you, all of you, to put such ideas aside. A collective intake of breath preceded a round of low murmurs at this request. Hannibal hid his hands within his robes to conceal their blush. One of my better ideas, if I do say so myself. This vote is about Prime Minister Killentar and his plethora of failings as our Prime Minister, even before his absence from his post in this time of crisis within the League. Several ambassadors called the vote to mute Ambassador Gurnan's microphone at the word crisis, before the Zoltan even had the chance to try and interrupt. The lizard attempted to use some of the Zoltan's hard-wired overrides to speak anyway, but even those proved no match for the ingenuity of a team of Byther and human programmers working together. Henry had paused to let the vote drama play out. Thank you, all, again, for allowing me to speak uninterrupted. However, I feel I must address the point that the Alton sub-ambassador is now trying to make by blasting all of your screens with all capital letter and poorly punctuated text. Henry paused for a moment to let a little mirth return to the room. He's trying to claim that humanity is the cause of the crisis, but I will remind everyone that the Zoltan brought this matter on by slaughtering a civilian colony vessel, and then lying to this council about it. They have further made no attempt to make reparations, sue for peace, nor even made a request for negotiation. That said, those matters should be considered only tangentially related to today's vote. This vote is about whether this council believes that Prime Minister Killentar is still fit to hold that office, or if he should be forced to step aside so that a new leader, one who will place the best interests of all members of this league at the forefront, can be chosen. I could, of course, go on for days about the failings of this particular individual. In fact, I believe that if we allowed everyone to speak, we could probably stand here and list specific instances of his failures and outright breaches of league law until the vote became moot, due to death by old age. Another chuckle, and Kaz almost missed his cue. The big man leapt up fast enough to be believed, however, and Hannibal gave way so his duke didn't have to shove him aside. Ambassador Archer, you start this meeting with a strong and impassioned reading of the call to order, then reminded us all of the import of what we are about to do, and then stooped to personal insults of a man who led this council for decades. I know, all too well, the bad blood between you and the Zoltans in general, and this individual in particular, but I will ask, no, I beseech you, all of you, to keep your words in check and within the proper decorum for this endeavor. I would remind you all that this session is being recorded, and every word you say will be judged over and over again for all time. Speak accordingly. Hannibal stepped back to his position as Henry allowed himself a small blush while raising a placating hand. I apologize, Duke Feldern, and my fellow ambassadors. As the vendor stated, I have a hard history and a lot of emotion tied up in this matter. That said, I shall endeavor to keep my remarks properly on point. I would also like to take this opportunity to remind all of you that this vote is about Kilintar and whether to allow him to keep his position, not about who might come after him. Let us all, please, set that particular question aside while we decide whether to undertake an action that has not been required for centuries. Nibble nodded to himself, but kept his face carefully neutral. I wish we could go ahead and get the vote for Prime Minister sewn up now, but the wild card being introduced by the Pinigran makes it too big a risk. Henry continued. So, I could go into great length and depth about Kilintar, but I won't. You have all been sent humanity's lengthy dissertation on the subject, and I think that document states my position and lays out the failings of Kilintar quite directly. Also, given my well-known bias on the subject, I suspect that even the greatest of truths from myself may be viewed somewhat askance by many of you. Also, even though Kilintar has refused to attend this hearing, despite being aware of what it is about, we should not make such a terrible and important decision without hearing opposing views. So, I will open the floor to any who wish to speak for or against Kilintar. The timer is on the wall, and I will state, for the record of which Duke Kazla reminded us, that you have all known about the time limit for some weeks now. Please do not make me cut you off. I have a schedule worked out for those who wish to speak for and against. If anyone wishes to challenge that schedule, they may call for a vote. Inable suppressed a smile as Gerfnan predictably called for such a vote, but got no takers to back him on it. Henry continued. Very well. Then we start with the Ruxa, who have remained neutral through this crisis and have even endeavored to protect so many of your interests when battle spilled out of the prescribed zones. Henry lowered his platform a bit, but not by much, and floated it to the back wall, while the Ruxa ambassador took the station he'd occupied. The cat spoke with eloquence and style, laying out his race's grievances against Kilintar, but carefully avoiding their complaints against the larger republic. As the man spoke, documents were sent to back his accusations, but most of the documents weren't even necessary. The man talked mostly about actions with which everyone was all too familiar, though Enable thought including the evidence that Kilintar was in fact behind the attempted purge of the council so early on was a bit heavy-handed. The feline finished with little time to spare, and graciously relinquished the floor so that the Eslar ambassador could go next. The woman kept her remarks succinct, to the point, and studiously about Kilintar. She tried to dismiss the Ruxa's evidence, but that went over poorly at best. When she finished, it was time for another set of grievances against Kilintar from Gorful. The ambassador had to be corrected 3 times by Henry, as he strayed into a prosecution of the Exaltans in general, rather than Kilintar. We wanted to have Kaz do that, of course, but with that damned Penigra holding some sort of surprise on us. Then came a defense from the Ikala. Predictably, the Pachyderm tried to dismiss Kilintar's excesses as merely a leader taking charge and doing what must be done, and allowable personal indulgences for one in charge of so much, and so much, and so many. Inable felt somewhat bad for the ambassador. Such a gentle race, but so hidebound and set in their ways. Finally, it came time for the Findles to speak. Emil held himself very still, and had to force himself to breathe. The ambassador doesn't know. He still doesn't know. He will do his part. And he did, almost as well as if they had planned every word themselves. The man's birdsong voice rang out to extol the virtues of the glorious Republic and the benevolent Sultan, and all that every race here owed them. Henry tried to cool the man down, but was met with an accusation from him of petty rivalry and trying to silence opposition. Before Henry could respond that he'd already allowed his own opposition to speak uninterrupted, Kazla let his own voice ring out across the chamber to call the Feindel down. The Birdman stared daggers at Kazla, but then something shocking happened. The Penigra ambassador stepped in and backed Kazla, while taking an opportunity to make subtle digs at Henry's impartiality. Enable wanted to smile at the development, at the realization that the man wouldn't do such a thing if he knew what was planned. But he could not. That Penigra is up to something, and I still can't figure out what. He's obviously trying to weaken Henry and doesn't seem concerned about strengthening Kazla. But why? The rest of the day went predictably enough. with lots of people bringing up grievances against Killentar and few trying to defend him, and those who did looking very much like they were grasping at straws. Henry refused to call a recess for lunch, so everyone ordered food to their own platforms. Hannibal, of course, took his turn to speak, and kept his remarks brief. He mentioned, almost in passing, times when Killentar violated council protocol to the detriment of the Fathern Empire, or just the well-being of its Venter populace. He then ceded the rest of the Venter's time to Kaz. The Duke spoke with solemn passion about the gravity of the decision to be made, and the unprecedented nature of it. How no Prime Minister had ever been called to a vote of no confidence by an ambassador not of that Prime Minister's own government. He studiously avoided mentioning the fact that every Prime Minister had been Zoltan, and he admonished both sides of the argument to keep their points civil and on point. He didn't name any names, but he gave a few specific examples of what he thought had been both excellent and poorly chosen arguments, both in defense of and against Killentar.